Good morning, everybody. I just need to move this stool because I'm a little bit taller than Carolyn. There we go. It's great to be here with you. I would have said before that I was probably somewhere around number 4 or 5 of Caroline's favorite students, until she forgot my name. So maybe we'll go number 13 or 14 just to see how that goes. As you said, I pastored in Billtown as the lead pastor there for a while. I served as a youth pastor and worship pastor, as a camp director at Kingswood, where I now lead the board. And if you put all those pieces together, you might figure out that I grew up in Annapolis Valley, in Centerville, just down the road. I graduated from NECIC, but also attended Cornwallis. So if you want to try and date me, that's the overlap. And I don't expect an answer right now, but at some point someone needs to explain this to me, because I've always wondered. I drove down the road, and I read the sign that says, "Welcome to Pereaux," and then I read the road that says Pereaux Road, and then I see the church that says Pereaux, and they don't spell them the same. And it's either a weird joke that Peroians play on the rest of the world, or there's something going on there, but I look forward to figuring out what that's all about. If you're visiting this morning, just checking out a new church, I'm sorry, you get me instead. Come back next week. Carolyn will show you how it's usually done around here. What I want to do today is different than what usually you do, I imagine. I want to kind of explain who CBM is if you don't know. I want to tell you about my trip and some of the strange things that go on with that. If Caroline introduced it at all, she may have made me sound like a criminal, which I'm not, so I'll try and mitigate any of those concerns, and then I'm going to look at the text and try and draw it all together. So we're going to hope this works. Look at that. So CBM, Canadian Baptist Ministries, for 151 years now, we had to adjust. Canadian Baptists have been going all over the world to fulfill the Great Commission, to tell people about Jesus. We talked about Bolivia briefly earlier. That's the second country where we went. We've been there for 100 years almost at this point, just doing incredible work there. And so 151 years ago, churches figured out pretty quickly that it's really hard to do things by themselves, and it's much easier to do them together. If you want to support a church on the other side of the world as one little church in a world before the internet and a world before all those things, it's really hard to do. But with 950 churches across Canada, it's not so bad. It's actually quite manageable. And so that's what they've been doing for a long time, first to India and then to Bolivia, and now to a whole bunch of different places. Currently, we have work in 30 different countries around the world. I'd like to show this map. The green ones are where we have work. The white ones we don't, mostly. If you're very quick and scan that, you might notice that there's not 30 that are listed, it's less than 30, and there are not 30 that are colored in. And if you're really, really observant, you'll notice, that doesn't work, that the country that Caroline said I'm going to talk about is not colored in green. And we'll get to that in a second. There are countries around the world, and you can probably think of some of them that for one reason or another, we don't talk about in overtly public ways, whether that be for the safety of people that are there in places in Asia, for example, or whether it be because of some economic sanctions that make our work a little more difficult than they need to be, like in Cuba. So here's the Coles notes of CBM and what we do and why we do what we do. We believe that sin, when it entered the world, has broken all of the relationships that we have. Our relationships with our Creator, our relationships with ourselves, our relationships with other people, and our relationships with creation. All those have been fractured by sin. But we also believe that the redemption of Jesus helps to heal and can heal all of those relationships, because all of it is under the kingship of Jesus. And so because of that, we can't separate what is spiritual from what is everything else, because the whole person is who Christ wants and is who Christ is. Because of that, around the world, we have partners that do this kind of work. All of our work fits in one of these buckets. In areas of kids at risk, serving them and working to combat poverty, seeking justice, building the church, and responding in times of crisis. 4 of these categories we can budget for and plan for, and the other one, you never know what happens. We have, I think, 4 different crisis response projects right now. One of them is in Cuba, one of them is in South Sudan, one of them is in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and as of Friday, one is in Myanmar in response to the terrible earthquake that happened there. So with over 130 some different projects, there's way too much to take in, and so we try and focus on one or two when we talk about them. Because the world, as with God's mission, is huge. So back in January, I get a phone call from my boss's boss, which is never a good sign. And he said, "Do you have anything booked for February 23rd? I said, "Well, I do, but I can probably move it around if I have to." I didn't know what he wanted me to do. And then I didn't really hear anything of it for a few weeks. And then I received the assignment. Hey Chris, you and Joe are going to Cuba. Anybody been to Cuba in the room? Yeah, lots? Perfect. Sounds luxurious, right? Impromptu trip to Cuba in February. Jackpot. To understand why I had to go, or why I went, or what happened, you have to understand why we had to go. And to understand why I had to go, you have to understand a little bit about what's going on in Cuba. So CBM doesn't actually run any programs. We don't have sites where things happen. We have partners that do things and we support them in a whole bunch of ways. And sometimes we help run them, but they're not our ideas. They belong to the local church and the local groups that are there who have invited us to come and support. So those churches were there before we get there and are there after we leave. And that makes them sustainable. Like any one of you, probably, the church was here before you get here and will be here long after you're gone. That's how things last. So in Cuba, our partner, as Caroline pointed out, is called Feedback, which is of course in Spanish, which of course I don't speak. So I won't dare. But it translates to the Fraternity of Baptist Churches of Cuba. They're a denomination, a group of churches that also agree that it's much better when they work together. These are some of the leaders of Feedback. And they oversee a number of projects in the area where they serve, which is in and around a city called Matanzas. So anyone that's been to Cuba know sort of where Matanzas is? Anyone been to Veradero? Yeah, turn the other way. You come to the end of the driveway, Veradero is there, Matanzas is the city, which would be to your left as you come out of the driveway. So they have these projects where they develop leaders, where they train pastors when they respond to crises. And they even have some sustainable development projects where they work through agriculture and through farming. In leadership development, they seek to ensure that pastors and church leaders are trained and understand that people require care in all sorts of ways, and that all that we do for these people is for the glory of God. In their sustainable development projects, those are in response to the economic uncertainty that exists. They never quite know when and where and with whom they can sell or buy from. And so in response to that, they have to be able to grow sustainable crops that don't require a lot of outside imports and that are diverse enough that they can feed the communities. And of course, as I said, crises happen. And in some places like Cuba, it seems to happen more and more as time goes on. We'll get to what's going on there now if you haven't heard about it. So why? Why did I have to go? We'll go back to this picture because I like it. The short version of why we have to go is because the company that we use to send money to other countries is based in the United States. And so they won't send money to Cuba because of various sanctions that are against Cuba and between the two countries. And so instead of hitting enter on your computer and sending money off, you put money in an envelope and you make the long transfer on a plane, and you deliver cold hard cash by hand to the partners. So I'm going to tell you what happened. You're going to inevitably have questions. Hopefully I'll answer some of them. And if not, come ask me, and then we'll move on. So about a week before I leave, I get a large deposit of cash into my bank account, and I have to go exchange it for US dollars. Two quick notes here, because you might be asking. If I worked at our head office in Mississauga, I wouldn't have had to do that, but they have money there. I don't have any money here that's corporate money. And yes, it is strange that it's US money, considering it's the US part that makes it so we can't send money to them. I have no answer to that. That's just what it is. So Friday, the 21st of February, I head to the airport, all my luggage in tow, which is the backpack I carried in. I always travel with just that, and I'll be vindicated for that here in a minute. With $5,000 US in my pocket, my colleague Joe does the same, but he flies from Toronto. We could fly direct. Most people know we can fly direct to Cuba without too much trouble, but we'd rather fly down together because we don't know what we're doing, and so we meet in Montreal. I arrive at the airport in Halifax, get through security, all that stuff, and then the board goes yellow. And if you fly at all, you know yellow means delay. And if you have a connecting flight, you mean delay. You know delay means pain in the tail. So I start doing math in my head, and I realize it's going to be really tight to get it. Eventually, my plane arrives, we board quickly, we take off, I'm in the air, I'm watching the flight tracker, I'm calculating when the flight leaves the whole time. The time flies by because I'm doing math. And I figure we'll get there with about 35 minutes to get off one plane, get from one gate to the other, and get on the other plane. Probably enough. Eventually we land, the pilot comes on and says, there's a lineup to get to the gate, we're going to have to wait on the runway for a bit. The clock ticks, my blood pressure rises, then the plane starts moving, and for reasons that I have to assume, based on nothing other than I think, because the pilot probably had to go pee, he parks, not the gate, and they roll up the stairs and we deplane onto the runway, and they usher us into the basement of the Montreal airport. I text Joe, I say, send me your location so I can find it. I don't want to look at the thing. It says 1.2 kilometers away. If you want to know how wide the Montreal airport is, it's 1.2 kilometers. When we were here, our gate was the last one over there. So I've got about 20 minutes, 1.1 kilometers, busy airport. Fantastic, let's do it. So I pick up, I hustle down the airport with my backpack in tow. I get in, they shut the gate immediately behind me, last one on the airplane. And it takes me about 2 hours to calm down. And then we're halfway to Cuba. So it's now about 4:30 Eastern, I guess, when I get on. Uneventful flight, great. We land in Veradero. Have to fill out a little form that says we're not doing anything illegal, which I wasn't, for the record. The reason we carried exactly $5,000 is because that is the legal amount you're allowed to take into Cuba. So I had to make sure there wasn't change in my backpack. I had to make sure I didn't have a $5 Canadian bill stuffed in a sock. We had 5,000 exactly, no more. So after a quick customs interview, then you go through the security scanner again, which is strange after you've flown. But we're there. You've got two guys. Neither one of them speaks a single word of Spanish. We have $10,000 American. No idea where we're going. We go to the front door and see a sign that says Joe. We've got a Joe. Sounds good. Our Airbnb host must have set it up. We get in, we meet who becomes my dear friend Gabriel, our taxi driver, walks us over to his car, which is awesome. That's why that picture's in there, just because it's cool. And then, as I said, to those who have flown to Veradero, you might know or remember that when you drive out of the airport, the driveway is very nice. It's just like palm trees on either side, it's very peaceful, it goes out. I think people feel like they've arrived for their vacation. Or at least that's what they told me, it was pitch black. Not just the sun was down, pitch black. Pitch black. As we came to the end of the driveway, that was when I first began to understand the two realities of Cuba. To my right, lit up like the sun, was the strip of resorts in Veradero. To my left and straight ahead was, I don't know, it was pitch black. as the rolling power outages that had swept Cuba for months continued to cause strain on the locals. The resort guests remain none the wiser, and we remain in the pitch black in a cab. So not only do we have two non-speaking Spanish tourists with a pile of cash, now seems like a good time to tell you it's about 400,000 pesos is the equivalent of what we traveled with, which is more than you want to have in your pocket at any given time. We're driving through these narrow streets, not sure where we are, but our cab driver, who I have to assume is trustworthy because otherwise I'll panic, tells us we're in a city called Matanzas. Eventually, the car stops in a little tiny alley, again, pitch black, and we see a flashlight, and a woman comes out, waves us over. She says her name and herds us up some stairs. She unlocks 4 gates to get to this place and opens up into, well, again, that, but an apartment with a candle lit in it. Our apartment. Hallelujah. Of course, it's dark. The city shut down. We can't get anything to eat or anything like that. Everything is closed, but it's still very loud. There's always dancing going on. Even when the power's out, they're just dancing. But we have some granola bars in our bags because we are prepared. So we'll survive. She leads us. It's about 9 p.m. We sit on the balcony in the dark. We call home on a jam cellular network. And then about 10:30 or so, the power comes on. Fantastic. Air conditioning, charge our phones, off to sleep. 6 a.m., blackout again. Nuts. So it's Saturday now. These are the views out our windows. As the sun came up, actually pretty nice. Who knew? But we've got a job to do. We had to get rid of this darn money. Because what I noticed when the sun came up is there weren't a lot of people that looked like me walking around the city of Matanzas. And we thought our cab driver was acting kind of strange. He thought we were there probably to do something way more sinister than we were. So we've got this contact. Oh, and I should mention that the person I'm there with is Lebanese. No one looks like him either. So we have a contact. She's the financial treasurer for feedback. We text her, kind of. She only speaks Spanish. We only speak English. So we use a system of Google Translate and WhatsApp to try and figure out, to tell her where we are. She says they'll be there at 10, and she's bringing a translator and a word that we think might mean chaperone, or maybe bodyguard, or something like that. We're like, oh, this is serious. Right on. All we need to do is count the money, have her count it, have her sign for possession so it's delivered, and we're done. Finally, a knock on the door. This is the road. This is from our balcony. Knock on the door. We don't know who we're looking for, but we still look through the people. I don't know what she looks like. And we see a man and a woman. We let them in without knowing a word of what she said or understanding at all. We knew it was the right person. Sometimes you just meet people and you know they're about Jesus stuff. And she was just this peaceful, beaming woman. And oh yes, the bodyguard. Her husband, as it turns out. He spoke a little bit of English, which was helpful. He was not exactly what I expected for a bodyguard. He was a professional ballet dancer who also works for feedback. He might have been shorter than Caroline. And like 80 pounds max. I felt very secure. A few signatures later, we're done. And then the power comes back on. Woo, we've done it. We go, we get some coffee, we explore, we find lunch, we have breakfast. We ate the whole day for a little bit less than $10 combined. It was just a lunch. It was yummy. Greetings. Everything after that was pretty smooth. Power stayed on. We ate well. We explored. 7 a.m. I left on Sunday morning and was home by lunchtime. Overall trip, about 44 hours. Time in Cuba, about 33 hours. How luxurious. And I got COVID on the way back, so. Good trips. This, I keep showing this one. This was our roof. We had a rooftop patio, and all the other pictures we saw over here were from the roof, and this was behind us. I just thought it was so cool. Yeah. Once the stress of the money was gone, it was kind of relaxing. It was nice. All right, let's take a look at the text and try and bring it all together. Oh yeah, we're doing okay. The Apostle Paul is encouraging the Christian church, or the Corinthian church, to help. Help a church that's in need. He's talking to a church that has some, but not everything, and he's saying, hey, this church is going through some stuff. How can we support them? He's not only saying you should, he's saying there's an obligation to do it. Grace we have received, and grace we shall return. And so the big issue for us is how we see God. How do we feel when we look and see his face? Paul knows this is the issue, and it's what he is doing in the second half of the reading we had before. It's showing that God is a giver on both sides of our giving. He gives us what we have, and he gives us the blessing for having what we have. Verse 8 talks about God giving on one side. That is, it says he gives us what we have to give. It says God is able to provide you with every blessing in abundance. It clearly says God wants to be known as bountiful. He is able. He's able to give us what we need to be generous. He is a giver, not a taker. The next verse picks up on this image that Paul uses earlier and says, if we sow bountifully, we reap bountifully. He quotes the psalm. The sowing of seeds that he uses here is this free and generous gift to other people to help. He calls it righteousness later. As he moves on, he takes the Old Testament quote and brings it out as a relation to God. He's the one who gives the seeds for scattering, and he's the one who brings harvest. He supplies you the seed to the sower, and bread for food will supply and multiply your resources. God the giver on both sides. Then in verse 10 he says, and he will increase or cause to grow the harvest of your righteousness. What does that mean? Well, righteousness is the generous scattering of seed to those in need. The harvest of righteousness is probably what grows up as a result of the scattering. In other words, God increases the harvest of your righteousness, means the same as he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. The point of verse 10 of this whole passage is that God is a giver, not a taker. He gives us the seed before we give so that we can sow generously, and he gives us an abundant harvest so we are rewarded and blessed through it. The truth of this text is that God wants to be known and trusted and loved as a giver in the whole affair of giving. Otherwise, our giving is draining and burdensome and oppressive and legalistic. And who needs it? I know what ministry in rural Kings County is like. Perhaps as well as almost anyone, I know what it's like. I know the blood and sweat and tears and finding every nickel you can find to care for your communities. I know it. I also know that I've seen brothers and sisters in Cuba doing tremendous work, and I know how grateful they were for the amount of money we were able to take them. And I don't say it lightly because it sounds ridiculous, but $10,000 isn't that much money. Like, it's a lot in my pocket, but it's not a lot. That's a church's oil bill in a lot of places. Even the smallest church in the EVBA, in our Annapolis Valley Baptist group, has more than double that much in their budget. And yet our partners at feedback serve and care for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in really vibrant ways, all for the glory of God. And I know the temptation is to look in first and to say, well, we need it, we've got this repair, what if this comes up, what can we do? Or maybe the temptation is to say we only need to care for the people that live within a kilometer circle of where we stand right now. Because the community you've been placed in is important. It's where you ought to focus much of your energy. But when we read the letters to the church in Corinth, even one of the first churches ever, they're being compelled and encouraged to share what they have in another place of the world, to sow abundantly, to see what God can do with what they give. We have been blessed to be a blessing. And so please consider how you can support the wider world, the wider work in prayer and resources for the men and women who serve Christ all over the world. Because by global standards, we are so rich. But as we read, when someone has been given much, much is required in return. And when someone has been entrusted with much, even more will be required. Thank you so much for putting up with me. God bless you. Amen.
So our final hymn kind of sums up this message, for the healing of the nations. And it's 621 if you want to follow in the hymn book at verses 1, 2, and 4, or follow on the screen. Receive now this blessing. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May God give you grace never to sell yourself short, grace to risk something big for something good, grace to remember that our world is too dangerous for anything but truth and too small for anything but love. So may the Lord take your hands and work through them. May the Lord take your lips and speak through them. And may the Lord take your hearts and set them on fire, both now and forevermore.